She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Catacrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Catacrow, Dagaba, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Catacrow, Dagaba, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country.
Life in the country, about life in the country, the sweet, sweet life in the country. Good evening to you, President Granger, and welcome to another edition of Anansi Web Education. Talk to us a little bit. How was your weekend? Or how's your weekend so far? How was your week? Any grocery shopping? Any gardening?
Good evening to you and your viewers. I suppose we've come to the end of the rainy season, a very long rainy season, and we've come to the start of a very hot, dry season. And I expect that we'll be having good weather from now on till Christmas time. So, as you can see, the garden goes from too much water to too little water. But we're getting by here in Guyana, looking forward to Christmas. And of course, next year, around this time, I'm sure that we'll be preparing for general regional election 2025. So I think that is what is in the air now. And there's an air of anticipation. And I expect that the whole country will be getting ready for GRE 2025.
A year of anticipation and a year of and people are hoping and keeping their fingers crossed for emancipation, from the miseries currently. And speaking of rains and flooding and so forth, those of you who are in Linden right now watching this program, our prayers are with you guys. It's horrible that with the flooding and the little storm and what people are enduring right now in Linden, and those who are supposed to be doing something to help have turned, for the most part, a blind eye on any sort of help or compensation for the people of Linden. So,
what you're saying is important because, as well known in politics all around the world, but certainly we've heard about it in America, that all politics is local, and that is one of the reasons why. Small parties, political parties in communities like that should ensure that the participation in local government elections and municipal elections should be robust because only they know, they know where the roof leaks, they wear the shoe, they know where the shoe pinches. And elections are important to call public attention to these abuses. And no matter what the PPP administration says, these problems did not exist, did not suddenly start in 2015. These are problems of neglect of the PPP administration, which never paid attention to Region 10. But now there's money from the petroleum industry, and we need to pay attention to the whole country and stop blaming the PNC and the APNU for everything that is wrong in the country. There's no proper road network in the hinterland, in Region 9, Region 8, Region 7, Region 1. So these are historical problems, and we need to sit down as Guyanese and solve these problems and stop trying to cast blame. The problems in Region 10 are well known, and the government must apply its resources, not just to Region 6 or Region 3, but to the whole country. So I agree with you that the problems in Region 10 are chronic problems, and this administration needs to pay attention to the interests of all of its people, not just the people who voted to the PPP Civic.
Well said. Thank you so much on that. And so our prayers are with you guys out there in Linden, and by extension, other parts of the country as well. And so we're talking. This is our topic for tonight. This is it. several small parties, minor parties, several minor parties were created and actually competed in the general and regional elections in March 2020. Yep, those small parties, and we're talking about March 2020 here, about those small parties. Tonight on our program, we will discuss the rise and the fall of small and minor parties. The program aims at answering the following questions. And let's get right into the question, President Granger. Question one: why were so many small and minor parties created? But before, let's again welcome all of you, regardless of where you are, whether you're in Guyana, on the quarantine, in Linden, Lethem, Bartica, Georgetown, West Coast Berbice, New Amsterdam, wherever you guys are. Good night. Whether you're in the Caribbean, Barbados, I'm told that we have lots of listeners in Barbados. Good night to all of you in Trinidad and all throughout the Caribbean, in North America, in Africa, wherever you are. Good night and welcome to AWI, which is the Anansi Web Education with President Granger, former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And now let's go back again. Several small and minor parties were created and actually competed in the general and regional elections in March 2020. Tonight's program, we will be discussing the rise and the fall of minor parties. The first question, President Granger, is why were so many small and minor parties created?
Well, the simple answer is that the emergence of these parties over the last 70 years, since we adopted universal adult franchise in the elections of April 1953, that's 71 years ago, elections have always attracted small parties. I reckon that in addition to the 9 which competed in 2020, there must be, more than 24 other parties, and I don't think many Guyanese living today might have heard about it. The Guyana United Muslim Party, Justice Party, Workers and Farmers Party. So there's a whole range of maybe 30 or more parties over the last 70 years. I think they were created because there was genuine concern on the part of some persons that their interests were not being properly represented by the 2 large parties, the PNC and the PPP. And they wanted a voice. They wanted to go into the National Assembly and they wanted to call attention to issues in their particular corner of Guyana. So I think there's a level of sincerity, and I think we must accept and acknowledge that. But also, there are some ambitious people who just want to be MPs. They just want to, enjoy what they feel is the prestige and the perks of high office, and to have that MP after their name be addressed as honorable. And that is a human aspiration. But there's a darker side to the emergence of these small parties. And it is my view that a few of them, not many perhaps, a few of them are actually counterfeit. They're fake. And the PPP has had this practice over the last 30 years or more of creating cardboard parties to prevent the supporters or the likely supporters of those parties from voting for rival parties. They know these parties can't win anything. They're not going to be capable of even raising 1 seat because, in fact, in 2020, 9 parties were able to just get 8,000 votes, which is just enough for 1 seat. So the PPP actually creates parties, and after the elections, sometimes weeks after the elections, shamelessly, the parties just disappear. The result is that, I don't name names, but the result is that many of those parties are like blotting paper. They blot up, they absorb votes that would otherwise have gone against the PPP. And when you consider the PPP only won 1 seat ahead of the AP and UAFC in 2020, you can see how important those small parties are. And this is what happened. And those 9 parties were able to prevent the APNU from getting those votes. I don't know if they would have voted for the APNU, but in any event, this is exactly what happened. So the fact is that some of them had been created by persons who were committed to change, and some of them were basically counterfeit. Some of them had no intention of bringing about change in Guyana or opposing the PPP. So that is why so many of them were created, and it will happen again in 2025. It's been happening for 70 years. It's been happening for 70 years. So I think the Guyanese political landscape has seen many of these parties rise and fall, and we must take a sober approach. I normally support small and minor parties. As you know, I was once chairman of the Partnership for National Unity, which had 5 small parties in it, and we worked quite well. And I can tell you that some of those parties, and I single out the Guyana Action Party, for example, worked very hard in one particular region to bring a large number of votes into the partnership. And others, maybe were not committed to work hard, and they never went to the campaign trail. So you see different types, even to the APNU, you have different types of parties. Some are visible and they campaign, and some are not visible. And actually, after 2020, when they were not seated in the National Assembly, they just left. So it seemed that if their objective was to get a seat and not to win a constituency, which meant getting 7,000 or 8,000 votes. You can't get votes without campaigning in this country, and you can't get a seat without campaigning. So that's why some of them were created, and again, some of them disappeared because they didn't. I suppose you can turn to the biblical parable to show some of them really fell on stony ground and they sprung up, but when the sun hit them, they just withered.
Indeed, withered. Indeed. Second question: who? And we're talking about those small parties that popped up in the 2020 general and regional elections. And I'm glad that you said that there are some small parties with folks who have good intentions, but the bulk disappear. Their leaders disappear. Their executives disappear. They're all gone. If they're not disappeared, they're gone into the folds of the PPP. We see it. The evidence is there. It's glaring. But let's go to question number 2, President Granger. Who were the leaders and members of small and minor parties?
I'm not interested in names or personalities. I'm interested in functions. And it seems that Guyanese politics attract a lot of attorneys, a lot of lawyers. I don't know the reason for this, but many of the persons who ended up as leaders were professional people. These were not ordinary folk. These are not country folk. These were largely urban. If you look at where the campaigns were launched, city hotels and private clubs, and they were attended largely by attorneys and businessmen and accountants, and these tended to be the leadership. I can't tell you what types of persons supported them, because you never saw many ordinary persons there. When you look at the head tables, when you look at the leadership, they were largely, I don't want to use class, but they're largely professionals, attorneys at law, and persons who are ambitious, I mean, they want to see better for themselves, and I think they feel their talents could be used. I'm not going to criticize that, but there is a marked absence of ordinary folk. And most of these parties are launched in upscale upscale buildings in hotels and private clubs in Georgetown. They're not even launched in the countryside, even though the majority of votes are in the countryside. They're all city-based. It's an amazing phenomenon of Guyanese politics, that you really don't have any strong rural-based, even small parties. All of them seem to be attracted to life in the big city. Well, I don't know the reason for that, but the members tend to be grassroots, but the leaders tend to be, from the upper branches of society. Um, Even though the parties are small, I don't know how that could be explained, but maybe the poorer folk are impressed by the richer folk, or maybe the folk lower down the social scale are impressed by people who they feel are high up on the social scale. But that is a phenomenon, that is a remarkable characteristic of small and minor parties in Guyana.
All right, that sums it up. Some of the smaller parties had some what I coined as flat-foot hustlers. The people are smart enough; they know who those flat-foot hustlers are. But lawyers, being in parcel of the politics, this go way back when lots of lawyers in the 60s and the 70s and so forth and so on, and it continues today. But I am glad that you've recognized that we have never seen a party launched, let's say, at Philippi or Alnis or Eversham, in front of a nice house at Eversham or Epsom or Brighton Village or Letterkenny or Wim. It's always in Georgetown at some quote-unquote fancy hotel. But let's go to the third question, President Granger. What was the cause? What was the cause of the rise and fall of small and minor parties?
Well, as far as the rise is concerned, there's always a wave of enthusiasm when elections approach. Many people seem to be convinced that once their party wins, life will be better for them. So they come out in their thousands. When you look at the size of the electorate, you're talking about hundreds of thousands. I mean, APNU is said to have gained alone nearly 218,000 persons. But many of them hope that they just get a better life with once their party wins. It's not just a horse race. I know that in APNU FC, we have a lot of thousands of genuine supporters. So they look forward to that. Now, they rise because the Guyanese population over the last 70 years has put a lot of faith in the political system to change their lives. We're a poor country. We're still a poor country. But there will always be people who will engage, I don't want to say exploit, they will engage with the poor folk to support them in the hope that they can deliver a better life. So they rise because of this aspiration, this hope that things could get better. Why do they fall? Well, that's the second part of your question. They fall because of various factors. Number one is that I reckon that they put a lot of faith in the sincerity and the integrity of the leaders, and sometimes they're not aware that their leaders are capable or susceptible of being co-opted by other parties, by big parties. Sometimes the leaders came from bigger parties. They can't get by in the bigger parties, what they call the large major parties. And they keep looking for somewhere they could be, in leadership positions. Some of them boast, the length of time they spent in the large and major parties, achieving the highest levels within those parties. They go to smaller parties. And they can fall for various reasons. One is that they're susceptible to inducement from the large parties. If they if they're looking for office, if they're looking for employment, if they're looking for election to certain positions, they can, they can be attracted by. Right now, the PPP administration is in office, as you know. Two leaders of those small parties have actually been elected deputy speakers of the National Assembly on the basis of PPP support. They can't be aware of that connection. They know what's going on, and they know that on their own, the number of votes they attracted would not justify even being in the National Assembly, much as being deputy speaker. So that is one problem. The second one is that many small parties cannot effectively campaign in Guyana. I can tell you, campaigning in a country of 83,000 square miles is expensive. The country is extensive. You've got to get into boats, you've got to canoes, you've got to get into aircraft, you've got to get into SUVs and ATVs in order to cover this country. Many small parties can't do that. So there's a financial problem, an organizational problem. And some of them can't even set up headquarters. Some of them can't, have proper press conferences. They can't employ staff to do opinion polls, to engage consultants. They can't even win over the media for some of their positions. And that is another problem. So there's the other question of representation. Because of the fact that many of them are city-based and they're led by city-based attorneys, accountants, and lawyers, they don't have deep roots in the countryside. Even if some of them might have been born in villages, they quickly become so urbanized that they lose contact, regular contact with their rural roots or hinterland roots. And so they're more often in the city than in their constituencies. Now, in some other jurisdictions, MPs have to visit their constituencies regularly. In fact, in our APNU, MPs have to be resident, or at the time I was there, I mean, that's 4 years ago, MPs have to be resident in particularly geographical areas. You're a geographical representative for Region 2. You have to live in Region 2. You couldn't be living in South Prime Belt or Diamond and represent your region. But after a while, some people have lost contact with their constituency, so they don't really represent the constituency on an ongoing basis. The other thing is that there's a feeling that the mobilization of voters is wasteful. That hey, they know they can't win a seat, they know they can't become president, and sometimes the larger parties try to convince them or even their supporters that it's a waste of time competing because you're not going anywhere. And as I said a little while ago, the PPP is actually invented parties for the sake of preventing their supporters or their likely supporters from supporting any other party. Some parties are lawyers' parties, some parties are doctors' parties. These are important constituencies, and if the PPP, and I think the PPP has done that in the past, actually sponsored parties, which tend to disappear soon after elections. So the mobilization of supporters has been a very important role, and it is my deep regret too that participation in local government elections has not attracted the support, active support of many of the small and minor parties. This is where they should excel because nobody knows the region, nobody knows the neighborhoods and communities better than small and minor parties. regrettably, they're attracted to the big game in the city of Georgetown, but that is where they should excel because they know their people best. And it's also a good apprenticeship for future leaders. This is how it used to be, that people should aim to get on RDCs, but I think many politicians now scorn the RDC. They don't want to be involved in community work and regional work. They want the big game. But I would say they fall because they don't develop the roots, the natural roots um, that they should have with their region. You don't see them moving about the villages, moving about the cane fields and the rice fields, moving about, the markets until it's election time. So after a while, they are alienated from their own constituencies. This is one of the failures of the way PR is introduced or implemented in this country. It doesn't have to be that way. But it calls for a different approach by the political parties. In my time at APNU, PNC and APNU, every MP had to be associated with, both by residence and function, with a constituency. And that is where your roots are. And if, as party leader, I was visiting a region, first person I speak to is the regional MP. First person I speak to is the MP who represents that constituency. And unless we rebuild that relationship between the candidate and the constituency, politics will not serve a useful function in this country. We are not just electing a bunch of bureaucrats. We're electing representatives, and this is something we must emphasize, that an MP represents a community of 7,000 persons. If you have no constituency, you don't have a place in the National Assembly. That is my view. If you have no constituency, you have no right to go to the parliament. Parliament is representative. And I think in the American system, people call it the House of Representatives. And you can't, even the British system, all systems are not the same, but essentially the core of politics is representation. And you can't tell a senator in America you don't represent something. You can't tell an MP in Britain you don't represent a constituency. It's just anathema. But in Guyana, people represent nobody. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. So I would say one of the reasons that they fall is because the roots are shallow. They don't have deep roots.
Roots are very, very shallow. Commitment might not necessarily be there. Self-interest might be what it's all about. And tonight's discussion, if you're now joining us, good night. We're talking about small and minor parties that were created, actually competed. And we're talking specifically here, the 2020 general and regional elections. And it takes us to our second to last question, President Granger. Where has the impact of small, very minor parties been greatest?
I can only answer in perhaps a conditional way to say it should have the impact should have been greatest in the rural and hinterland areas. It should have been greatest, but there has been a tendency for everything to move to the larger parties and to the center. I cannot say now that, except for the two large parties, there is strong representation of political organizations in rural and hinterland areas, and this is a pity. But the impact of smaller minor parties should have been greatest in the rural and hinterland constituencies. Not that there are no problems in the urban areas, but there are only 10 towns. There are only 10 towns, and under the APNU, we created 10 councils. So it means that the local government system, the municipal system, evolved remarkably, after a period of decades, which the PPP was simply installing interim management committees, IMCs, which nobody cared about. People picketed the IMCs, from Kwani to Kaichuma to Lethem. But we created living institutions called town councils. So that is where small and minor parties should have been strongest. So in answer to your question, the impact should have been in those four new hinterland municipalities, should have been in the villages and rural communities, should have been in the NDCs and RDCs. But I would say that the impact has been muted. The impact has not been to the level that I had hoped for or I would expect.
Thank you for that question. Again, as we go to the final question for tonight, and it has to do with how well did small and minor parties represent their supporters? You did in the beginning. We know that a lot of these pop-up parties, their leaders or quote unquote leaders just disappeared. They no longer care about the things that they spoke about. Some of them just end up in the arms and on the laps of the PPP regime, and some of them just don't do anything to represent the constituency that they claim that they are part of or they represent. Some of them just pop up, raise hands, and disappear. But back to the question, the final question for tonight is, how well did small and minor parties represent their supporters, those who had supporters?
To answer this question, you would need to establish some yardstick or some criteria in order to measure the performance. It is easy to measure the performance of those which have completely disappeared, like Change Guyana, this is gone. Is zero representation. So on a scale, on a continuum from high representation to no representation, I think some of them definitely could be positioned in no representation. Others, maybe somewhere along the line, could be positioned. I cannot say off the top of my head that any one of the small parties is on a continuous basis actively campaigning and communicating and with their constituents and articulating the grievances of those constituents. It's all left to the big parties. It shouldn't be. But because their roots are so shallow, they don't have anybody to speak with because they have no constituency. They have nobody to speak with. Who are they going to speak for? Oil and gas. Who are they going to speak for? Chamber of Commerce. They don't speak for those 7,000 persons who theoretically would have come out to vote for them to put them in parliament. So anybody in parliament should represent a community, either a geographical community or a demographic community of about 7,000 people. And it is difficult to measure the performance. They say even if you put them on a continuum, some are definitely some contribution definitely zero. Others maybe it's up to them to demonstrate, and I'm sure that as you get closer to general and regional elections 2025, some of them will start to be more active. They'll have press conferences, they'll pay visits. But elections are the culmination of a process. They're not the whole process. The process is representation at the RDC level and in the National Assembly and at the NDC level. But it is not happening. And I fear that the majority of those people are left unrepresented, especially by the smaller minor parties. I think they can do better. And they must turn their game around. They must change the attitude. It is not an adventure. It's not a horse race that people who normally do some other business, could simply come out on election day and say, vote for me, and we go into parliament. I think they need to understand that parliament is hard work, that politics is hard work, and they must go there and find out what the people want and represent those people's interests. And when that doesn't happen, it becomes, farcical. It just becomes a show. The chief is dead, the war is done. Sort of mentality. Once elections are over, well, they forget their supporters till next election.
Positions.
5 years, people will probably not see some of those candidates again.
Yep. I've not seen most of them again, and quite a few of them gone right into the bosom of the PPP, hustling, got to survive. I guess that's their game, and not necessarily in the interest of the people they claim that they want to represent. With that said, tonight's program, we've dealt with several small and minor parties that were created and actually competed in the general and regional elections in March 2020. We don't have to have a crystal ball to know that there will be quite a lot of those smaller parties who popped up in 2020 and disappeared. Some of them got a little cushy positions with the PPP. Some of them became deputy speakers. They do not represent their constituencies. So you've got to be careful with those individuals as they pop back or they're prepared to pop back up on the scene. Some of them are having a claim that they have a voice now. They're suddenly speaking out in the interest of their puppet masters. We see them, we know who they are. The people out there are very smart. They know who those individuals are, those flat-foot hustlers who pop out only on elections time to collect a little change, not for any proper exchange, not for any change for the betterment of Guyana, but for a little change, a little small change. Having said that, I can go on and keep preaching, preaching. But we get a little thing. I wanna get to this little thing as we leave the people this evening and prepare to return next week. A little Creole. A lot of people, the Jamaicans do it, the Trinidad do it, the Bajans they do it. Even the politicians, the prime ministers, and so forth, they get a little Creole thing. It's only those of us in Guyana, we are somewhat reluctant to go back to our Creole life and talk a little Creole thing, what's going on, what's happening, and these sort of things. We don't do it. And so tonight I want to, we introduce the little Creolese version. And tonight's inaugural something, and I'm glad that we are onto this, something that the people, as they would listen, the Creole something. The Creolese, Psalms 37. This is a big message. Psalms 37, the Creolese version. Right after this program, I want you guys to pay attention. It's not going to be too long, just about a minute and about 12. Well, it's a little over that, over 4 minutes. But President Granger, and congratulations on this year. I want to hear you with this Creolese thing, You've spent some time at Auckland Village, Bartica, but maybe Auckland and Wim and these areas, I want to hear your Creolese. Not those people from only those areas with their Creolese. Tongue people to Linden people to Kokwani people to Bartica, all of them with their Creolese. Growing up under quarantine, they said, why y'all gotta behave, y'all say, God watching, and God, dog, are you a little picnic? I'm so glad that we have this here, the Creolese version. Why this? Why this Creolese version? Spend a minute. Tell us, please.
I'm attracted to an old teacher whose motto was, if children can't learn the way they're taught, teach them the way they could learn. And I think anyone who's been involved in teaching would recognize that many Guyanese children speak among themselves and in their families and to their parents one way. But when they go to school, they are taught in a more formal way. But experienced teachers know that if they want their children to understand, they have to speak to the children's parents, their mothers and fathers, and they will discover that children understand better when you speak to them the way their parents would speak to them at home, normally. And the parents wouldn't speak always in a formal way, and they'll speak in a more informal or conventional or vernacular way. I'm not a linguist, but I believe that in some circumstances, if you're preparing a document with the international community, of course you write formal English. But if you're speaking to children and they don't understand one way, use language that they would understand, even if in church. And look, in the Christian church, for example, you can hear people singing, the Lord's Prayer in a version that maybe Mario Lanza made popular, or people have always made changes. And you can look at 10 different Bibles, and every one of them tries to create a new version, um, sometimes not based on the original version. But the whole question of communication is something that could be explored in another program. And by speaking Creole or Creolese, as some people call it Creole, some people call it Creolese. But the whole idea is to get people to understand, God's work and what the Bible is trying to say. Sometimes the language in the Bible, written, 600 years ago, Elizabethan England, you know, doesn't always communicate the idea to the people. And language is a living thing. And what was valid or effective 600 years ago is not valid and effective today. So I feel that more use must be made of this form. And I've had this issue when I visited the Siripati College of Education some years ago. And the students complained that the instructors did not want them to speak Creole or Creolese. Uh, but I said, you have to teach children the way that they understand. And essentially, most Guyanese are bilingual in the sense that they can speak one way to their children and their friends and the communities, and speak another way when they're addressing the United Nations or some international organization. So we must accept the existence of two methods or two forms of communication. And I think one is as valid as the other. The whole idea is that the end product must be that the listeners understand.
All right. Thank you so much. You mentioned even when they address the United Nations, I smile because, while a lot of Guyanese are bilingual, it seems as though some are just one lingual. If there is ever such a word, since everything in Guyana seemed to be one Guyana, one lingual. I heard a story though that somebody went to the United Nations not so long ago, claimed to be representing Guyana, not being political here, and they had to get a translator. President Granger, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your time this evening and looking forward to have you back again next week. Please give our regards to the former First Lady, Sandra Marie Granger. Thank you, sir, and to all of our listeners. Thank you as well. Don't go, guys, do not go. Listen to Psalm 37, the Creolese version, and it's by David Granger, former president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Y'all don't go no way. Y'all stay right here. Y'all stay right here. Thank you, President Granger.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah.
I think the button is at the bottom, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll get it. We're getting up there, you know. We're getting up there, but we'll get it.
Have the patience. Nobody is there with people that getting by because them wicked. That get fixed. Just tell Paul, nobody is there and don't misbehave. Them wicked people going to get punished because them that follow God when they inherit the land. Long, them never going to feel shame when things bad, and them going to be satisfied hard go up a season. God the enemy when burn up like animal fat in the fire. And them wicked people when dead. Them wicked people like a borrow but not pay back. But good people does kill. Them that God bless going to inherit the land. Them that God curse in kept in nothing. God show good people where to walk and he's satisfied with that. God hold them up and even if them fall, they're not going to get knocked out. We've been young, but now we get old. But we never yet see good people get left by them picnic begging for food. God always merciful. He does help out and bless their picnic. No word and live long, not the wickedness. God love good people. And that's why nephew says they're going to live long, but bad people picnic going to suffer. Good people going to inherit the land and live long. Good people that stop sense. God lie in them heart. When them walk, them not going to slide. Them wicked people watch good people and look for kill them. God, when left them, not condemn them when them get judged. Stand good with God. He's going to lift you up to take over the land. You're going to see them wicked people get shut out. We don't see powerful wicked people spreading themselves like tambourine tree. Yet, them vanish. Yeah, you look for them and it's gone, be gone. Take note of what people, God, they're looking for peace. But wicked people going to get destroyed. Yeah, wicked people can suffer. God going to save good people. God is them strength when them get worries. God going to help them and deliver them from the wicked and save them. You know why? Because they trust God.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And let's just let me just say my apologies for the little technical hiccup there, but I'm glad we were able to rectify it. Thank you so much for that piece, President Granger. Appreciate it. And to all of our listeners, have a great rest of the night. And remember,
Good night.
punish those wicked people. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Have a good night.